And I am delighted and excited to announce today one of the most outstanding personalities in mixed methods in the field, and this is John Crested. We are very happy to have you here, John. And John is not only one of the world's most active writer and editor, he's also one of the world's most and best known representative of that concept. And he's also unique, and this is very special to me, in his passion to continuously develop the concept further in distinct concepts, and he's seeking the discussion and the debate, so to keep it open and to make it really evolving for future necessities and so on. And last but not least, to make it known around the world. And I think this is something that we really need to overcome that old diverging range and to really see the benefits of both concepts. You will find a short overview in the program of this conference of the numerous publications that John did and all the academic activity, which it would be a long list to say it here. What you don't find in the program is that John is also a passionate teacher and coach. And for a couple of years, he is now traveling around the world with a team with Mariko Hiroso. And you fulfilled a study with very complex mixed methods design. And the two of them travel around the world and teach and coach researchers and researchers communities. So please join me in welcoming today for the keynote of the MQIC 2020, John Crested, and we are very much looking forward to
it. Okay, is this on? It's on. Guten Morgen. Schlaf Sie gut? Schlaf Sie gut, ja. Mein Deutsch ist nicht sehr gut. Aber Englisch. Ich würde Englisch sprechen. Heute. Hi. So I mixed a little Japanese in there. Did you get that at the end? The hi?
Hi.
Hi. Arigato gozaimashita. I'm here with my wife, Mariko Hirose Creswell. She's a Japanese citizen. She completed the first mixed methods dissertation at her Japanese university, Kansai Gakuin University. It's near, kind of near Osaka, Japan. And she's a clinical psychologist. So this was the first mixed method study in psychology at her university. And her department in psychology was very quantitative in its orientation. So she had to convince them of the value of qualitative research and then further convince them of the value of mixed methods research. And she put together just a great study. I'm going to show you one of the slides from her project here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about mixed methods research. Now, I've been a user of qualitative software for many, many, many years, maybe 30 years or so. I started out with text-based alpha probably in the late 1980s when the software was first developed. Then when I opened my mixed methods research office at Nebraska, we started using MaxQDA. Then when I went to Michigan and we opened up the mixed methods program at Michigan, we started using MaxQDA. Now we're doing complete workshops at Michigan on using MaxQDA. Is Tim here? Tim's back there. So he's our trainer. He's doing beautiful MaxQDA workshops, and our workshops are filling up. So I've been a user of qualitative software and an advocate for it for many, many years. And when I came upon mixed methods research, I had felt the same way that I felt starting to use computers. This was an exciting new adventure, and that was going to take off. That was going to become a methodology that would be used around the world. So what I want to do here is first talk a little bit about what mixed methods research is, and then I want to go into some of the advances that have occurred, so that those of you that are using MQIC can think about adapting Max to some of these new features that are coming along in doing mixed methods research. And as you probably know, MQIC is the industry software leader in bringing mixed methods actively into the software program, complete with a pull-down menu of different options for doing mixed methods research. And I've been working with 𝗖𝗍𝗀𝘀𝗲𝗹𝗹 here on some publications. So it's really quite exciting that now MQIC is both a qualitative software program and a mixed methods program. So a little bit about myself to begin with. I've been writing these research methods books starting in the late 1980s in really three areas. General research design books. This is my book, first book out. Came out in 1994. My son now is a co-author. He's a psychologist at Carnegie Mellon. And then I had an educational research book on general research design. Then I've worked on two qualitative research books. The Qualitative Inquiry and Research Design book talks about 5 different ways of doing qualitative research. Narrative, phenomenology, grounded theory, ethnography, case study. And I'm working with 𝗖𝗿𝗲𝗪 out of Alberta, Canada as a co-author on this. And then on this book, The 30 Essential Skills, is my favorite book. It's a very applied book. I really talk about how I would do qualitative research, from coding to developing themes to using software to doing intercoder agreement checks to doing one-on-one interviews. This is now going into the second edition, and my daughter, who is works at Columbia University, New York City, she's head of the online social work program. She's a co-author with me on that. And my wife, Mariko, is doing a Japanese translation of this 30 Essentials book right now. So I have a family-run business too, just like the 𝗍𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗃. And it's quite exciting to get these people involved. And then my two mixed methods books. The more general book, Designing and Conducting Mixed Methods Research with Plano Clark. It was one of the first mixed methods books to come out, and it's our large compendium of procedures on doing mixed methods research. And then back in 2015, I was at Harvard and I was teaching a mixed methods course, and they convinced me I should take my lectures and turn it into some kind of a book. So for these medical people who can't read a 400-page big book on mixed methods research, I developed this concise introduction to mixed methods research. And this can be read in 2 to 3 hours, and it's very inexpensive. And it's being translated in multiple languages around the world because it's so short. And so I'm quite proud of this book. It tries to introduce a person to mixed methods in a very short time. And then Mariko and I are splitting our time between Honolulu and Osaka, Japan, going back and forth. Now, we've actually presented on mixed methods research, and where I feature her dissertation, maybe 14 or 15 times now. And what we're doing is we're advancing mixed methods in many different countries in Southeast Asia area. We've been to Australia, we were in Indonesia last summer. In December we were in China. We're going to the Philippines here in a couple weeks. We were in Trinidad, Thailand, Singapore, and now Germany. So mixed methods is taking off around the world. And in some of these Southeast Asian countries, places like Japan or Thailand, their understanding of qualitative research is really quite minimal. They're very strong in quantitative research. So we opened up at Osaka the Institute for Southeast Asian Qualitative and Mixed Methods Research, and we've been doing workshops on qualitative research in Japan. We've had some international people come, and next October we hope to have a MQIC workshop in Osaka, Japan, downtown Osaka. So we would invite you. You'll hopefully hear about this. We'll be advertising it, and Udo and Anne will plan to come, and we'll introduce the Japanese to MQIC even more than where they are right now. So these are all exciting developments. Do you have a chance in your research project to collect both quantitative and qualitative data? I mean, even if you're doing focus groups or one-on-one interviews, you probably have some demographic data about the participants. Age, marital status, education. You have some quantitative data. And you may have an opportunity to give them an attitudinal survey of some kind, measuring some concept like self-esteem. So you have that opportunity of gathering both quantitative and qualitative. If so, you have the option of using mixed methods research, I believe, and bringing the two together. Just a little bit about how this developed. I showed this slide yesterday at my workshop. But mixed methods research is about 30 years old. It started in this time period of 1985 to 1990. And there were about 9 people around the world that had come to the same point. Why are we keeping quantitative and qualitative research separate? Why don't we begin thinking about how we can put them together? We were not talking to each other. We were in different fields. Management, evaluation, sociology, education, nursing research. We were working in different countries around the world. But we'd all come to the point where qualitative now was beginning to develop and establish its presence as a research methodology. And it would make sense to begin combining it with quantitative. I was teaching a graduate course on writing a doctoral dissertation proposal. And I remember during this time period of 1985 to 1990, I would have students in my class. Some wanted to do a quantitative dissertation. Some wanted to do a qualitative dissertation. And so I would start a night like, tonight we're going to learn how to write a good research question. First, how do you write a good hypothesis, a directional hypothesis? And then I say, now we're going to talk about how to write a good qualitative research question. So I was literally going back and forth. So even in my own mind, I was beginning to think about, well, maybe we need to begin bringing the two together. And when I wrote that first book on research design from Sage, came out in 1994. I worked on it for about 6 years. There was a chapter in that book called Combining Qualitative and Quantitative Research. And more people contacted me about that chapter than anything else in that book. So I thought there was interest. So here were the people, the founders during this time period. And so there was a little lag here until 1998 when 𝗖𝗵𝗪 and 𝗪 first started writing a book on mixed methods as a methodology. But when they edited the handbook on mixed methods research, it's a 400-page, 23-chapter handbook. There was an attempt to kind of outline the entire field. And I have a chapter in that book, and I was a consultant on that book, to develop research designs. So that began really to put the field together in 2003. And then we lobbied Sage Publication for several years to try to get a journal started. We thought there was, if this field is going to grow as a methodology, let's have our own journal. So by 2007, we started the Journal of Mixed Methods Research. 𝗖𝗵𝗪 and myself were the first co-editors of that. And it was reviewed for an impact factor within 2 years, which was unheard of at SAGE at that time. So again, we felt now we're on to a new methodology with an established journal. Then in 2011, the National Institute of Health, now that's the large funding agency for health in the United States, commissioned a group of us to put together best practices in mixed methods research. And we wrote the document and put it up on a website, NIH website. Now there were over 20,000 hits within 2 weeks on this website, and today it's one of the most heavily hit websites. So people are beginning to read in the health sciences about the importance of mixed methods research. By 2013, we began forming an international association, which has grown all around the world. This is a group of mixed methods researchers that are coming together as a community. And there's an international conference every 2 years, and then on those off years, there are regional conferences. So Mariko and I were speaking in Trinidad at a regional conference. There's a regional conference in Tokyo. There's a regional conference in New Zealand. So each year there are 2 or 3 or 4 different regional conferences that are developing. There's a South American mixed methods chapter developing as part of this association. There is the Japanese chapter that's part of the association. There's the Caribbean chapter that's part of this association. So you can see why Mariko and I have been presenting to all these Southeast Asian countries. There's quite a bit of interest right now. So then, one other thing that the NIH did, National Institute of Health in America, was develop a training program. I don't know of a counterpart like this in England or here in Europe. But the idea was to train health science researchers in mixed methods research. This is a partnership between Michigan and Harvard and Johns Hopkins. And we're in our second cycle of funding, and we're training 144 health science researchers to be experts in mixed methods research. That's an important development. And then finally, more recently, the American Psychological Association has come up with standards for mixed methods research and for qualitative research. And if you bought the new style manual, it came out I think last October, there's a whole section on the standards for doing good qualitative research and the standards for doing mixed methods. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But this is a major historic step forward for qualitative research and for mixed methods research, I believe. So you can see here how a methodology develops over time. People start talking about it, writing some books and journals. Their funding comes along, an association comes along, training program, and people start talking about what are the standards for doing good, rigorous work. This is how this methodology is unfolded in the last 30 years. And one thing about this methodology that really makes it different, you know, when you think about a methodology, I'll take a quantitative one like meta-analysis that started in the 70s and 80s. It was basically promoted by a few people at conferences, and they started doing some workshops. Today, mixed methods has the internet and has the digital world to help promote it. That makes it a very different methodology. So now we have webinars. We have a MOOC coming up on mixed methods research. We have discussion forums on mixed methods research. So now mixed methods is a methodology being promoted within the digital world. That makes it a little bit different than a methodology like ethnography or meta-analysis that grew up under other circumstances. Now, mixed methods research, to me, really there are 5 key elements. You collect both quantitative and qualitative data in answer to quantitative and qualitative research questions. And just because you're collecting more data doesn't mean you need to diminish the rigor of your data collection. It still needs to be rigorous. Rigorous sampling, rigorous recruitment, rigorous data analysis procedures. But what we're going to do with these two databases now is we're going to begin connecting them, intersecting them. We're not going to keep them separate. We're going to analyze them separately, but then we're going to put them together. We're going to integrate them. So integration, combining them is a key element. And then we have developed certain procedures, designs for this integration. And we're also going to put theory and philosophy into our project as well. So if you have a chance to collect quantitative and qualitative data, think about how you can begin bringing the two databases together in mixed methods research. And I think recently I've begun talking more and more about these are really the three core ideas of doing mixed methods research. We're going to integrate or mix the data. And now realize that I'm focusing here as an applied methodologist on the methods section. I could talk about mixed methods from a philosophy section, or from a research question, or from a paradigm perspective. But my focus tends to be on mixing the data, using mixed methods designs. And when we do this, we gain additional insights or inferences beyond what we learn from just analyzing quantitative or qualitative alone. This is what makes mixed methods valuable. We're actually mining our data further. We do a lot of text mining in both quantitative and qualitative, but now I'm talking about mining our data further when we begin integrating it. So at Michigan, we've had this mixed methods program running for about 4 years. And I've been part of a think tank there. We've been lucky because a number of the leading mixed methods people have all come to Michigan. The journal is located there. We've got the leading social work mixed methods person, Daphne Watkins, there. We have the leading VA researcher in the health sciences there. We have the leading implementation science person there. This has been a think tank where we offer workshops each year, and we're actually developing this mixed methods methodology further. Just like what you're doing here at MaxQDA, adding new components in and developing your software further. So what I want to share with you are some of these new developments that have begun appearing in our work at Michigan. These are innovative features. You know, I think if I were doing a mixed methods project, I would want to include the latest ideas. It's going to help get published. It's going to give visibility to your work. It's going to make your project stronger. So I want to talk about 9 advances that we're really thinking about. And these are the 9 that I'm going to go through here. Design diagrams, this concept of implementation matrix, integration, data table, rigorous procedures, joint display, which I think MaxQDA has done a great job of enabling you to use MaxQDA to develop your joint displays, a mixed method study aim, and conceptual framework. Like I said, at Michigan, we've been working as a team to develop and advance this methodology further. We have these interactive workshops. We have one coming up in about 10 days. These fill up. We have about 30 people. We are also conducting research projects where we go on projects around the world. We do a lot of mentoring. We have a very active visiting scholar program in our mixed methods program, where visiting scholars come from around the world and spend time with us. Right now we have someone from Denmark, and we have somebody from Japan coming for a year. They participate in our workshops, and we help mentor them. And we're all pretty active as consultants on different projects, both social science and health science projects. And here's kind of a picture of the team. The director and associate director, Mike Fetters, and the associate director is Tim at the back of the room here. And we have really exciting people working with our group. Well, the idea of having a mixed methods design is something that's a very important feature of mixed methods research. A design, some type of a figure that identifies the procedures. This really came about almost 15 years ago when we started thinking along this line. I was visiting with project officers at our National Institute of Health, and they were saying to me, John, we like mixed methods research, but you know, people are coming in with such complex ideas, we can't understand what they're doing. So at that point we began thinking about how we might draw a diagram of the procedures to simplify it, because what we have here is a collection of both quantitative and qualitative data, and analysis of both quantitative and qualitative data, and then the further analysis of combination of the two databases. So we have quite a bit going on in a mixed methods project, and we came up with designs or procedures, and we know that those exist in the quantitative world. We do a survey, an experimental study, a true experiment, a quasi-experiment, a single subject type of project. We know that they exist in the qualitative world. We'll do a grounded theory, we'll do an ethnography, a case study, a narrative project. So back in 2003 we began really thinking about what are the designs for procedures that would help us visually present our procedures of mixed methods research. Why not have designs, specific designs that are unique to mixed methods research? So in this new book on mixed methods research, the new edition that came out from Plano Clark and myself, our chapter 3 really kind of goes through the 3 core designs, and then we talk about complex designs, where we're taking these core designs and we're embedding them within more complex procedures. And this is kind of where we are now. If you were to write a mixed method study for publication in an international journal, you need to mention the type of design that you have and put together a diagram of that design. And then we started labeling these designs. This is called a convergent design. The names have changed some over the years, but this is kind of where we are today. Convergent design is where I'm going to collect both quantitative and qualitative data, and I'm going to merge the two databases so that I can really compare the results of the two different databases. When we do open-ended interviews, we're going to get a different perspective than probably when we administer an attitudinal instrument and measure the same concept. So we can actually compare what's going on, and then you make an interpretation. And in this design, which is not an easy design actually, you know, these two databases may give you a very different picture, so you need to then follow up. In mixed methods we've talked about follow-up procedures if your data are giving you different viewpoints. And then lately I've started modifying this convergent a little bit. What I call it a convergent transformative design. It's where I take my qualitative data and I transform it to counts, and then I merge it with a quantitative database. It's still a convergent. I'm collecting both types of data, I'm merging it. It's just that I take my qualitative and transform it. In the area of second language learning, for example, when we're working at Cambridge University, This is a very popular design. If you're familiar with the assessment field, you know that it's a quantitatively oriented field. So they're not going to be content with just using the qualitative data in its raw state. They've got to convert it to counts of some kind, to numbers. Also, in special education, in some of the health science areas I've worked in, this is a very popular approach. Now, as a qualitative researcher, I really feel that that minimizes the value of qualitative data. So I'm not a great fan of data transformation, but I understand that people need to publish within their field in a way and do research in a way that's acceptable. And some fields are very quantitative in their orientation. Another core design is called explanatory sequential. We're trying to explain our initial quantitative database with qualitative data. I think this design is the most popular graduate student design in the US right now. It's very clean. You've got clean phases. You know, you can first gather your quantitative survey data, and then you can follow up with some qualitative interviews or focus groups or observations to help explain this. I've got illustrations of each one of these, but I was in Boston speaking to the health commissioners from all across the city of Boston. They just completed a major community survey, and they began talking about how the results from that survey were very confusing. Some of them are very contradictory to what they expected. Fortunately, I was in the room that day, and I said, well, why don't you follow up qualitatively to understand those survey results in more detail? In other words, let's do mixed methods research. I said, we need to think about that approach. So, following up quantitative with qualitative in order to explain that and those quantitative findings in more detail. You know, when we do a quantitative study, we get nice p-values and confidence intervals and effect sizes, but we don't know why the people really responded the way they did. So let's follow up qualitatively, and let's use a mixed methods design. You see where I'm gathering both quantitative and qualitative data, and I'm bringing the two together. And then we have the exploratory sequential design. This is really kind of a more rigorous design. It has 3 phases. We start qualitatively to explore. We might do some interviews. And we use that information to build some quantitative feature that's sensitive to the community, sensitive to the context. We might develop a survey instrument that's well suited for a particular population. We might come up with some new variables. We might actually identify experimental activities that we could use in an experiment. Phase 2, and then phase 3, we actually test that out. So as we work in global research around the world, this is a very popular design. My colleagues at Harvard that are doing global health research, they're all using this design. You can't go into Rwanda and drop in a Western depression instrument. You've got to first talk to the people. And you've got to adapt that instrument to the community. So making these quantitative measures context-specific to communities and populations is very important in much of our research. If you think about this design, this takes a lot of skills. You need to be skilled in quantitative research, qualitative research, understand mixed methods research, but also skilled in building this quantitative feature. For example, in some of the projects at Michigan, they're using this design to build websites. So we get to that point, we bring in a whole team of website designers to work with us to develop that website, and it's based upon gathering the qualitative data first. So this is a little bit more rigorous, but a nice design if you're trying to explore before you build, before you test some type of a quantitative feature. It's really good for doing experimental research because sometimes you don't know exactly what type of interventions to use in your experiment. And if you can explore first, you can build an intervention that might actually work with the people you're studying. You see that? So basically in these three or four core designs, how you're actually integrating, you're either merging the data, which is a convergent design, or you're connecting the data, which is an explanatory sequential, exploratory sequential design. And if you're going to connect the data, which goes first? So in my experience, people that are coming into mixed methods from more of a quantitative, they like explanatory sequential design because it starts first quantitatively. Whereas you have the global researchers I was talking about who are mainly qualitative, they like starting qualitative, like exploring qualitatively first. So it's just merging or connecting as integrative strategies. And oftentimes people choose one of these core designs based upon their training, their colleagues, and their orientation towards research methodology, whether they're more quantitative or qualitative. And sometimes they choose these based upon what seems to be a popular way of doing mixed methods research within their field. So these are some of the considerations. Now, I mentioned that we wrote this book on mixed methods with Chapter 3 on core designs and Chapter 4 on complex design. And I mentioned this example yesterday. It's kind of, it's humorous now, but it wasn't humorous at the time. But I was in Ottawa, Canada, speaking to nursing researchers. And I went through those core designs. And someone at the back of the room raised their hand and said that, well, John, my design isn't one of these three. I'm doing something very different. And the person actually left the workshop. So yesterday I said I went running after the person, but no, I didn't really do that. But it started me thinking about, maybe there's a whole set of designs beyond these four core designs that are useful for people. So we began thinking about not just gathering quantitative and qualitative data in a project, but actually putting that quantitative and qualitative data within some larger framework, some larger process. So what are these processes? Well, one would be to do an experiment with a pre and post test. And we can put qualitative in before the experiment. So here's the qualitative, here's the quantitative. We're combining the two, but we're using qualitative before to explore. Or we can put qualitative data into this experiment during the experiment, more of a convergent design. Or we could put the qualitative into the experiment after the study is over. In other words, we'll do our experiment and then we'll follow up qualitatively to understand those experimental results in more detail. My colleague in Sheffield, England, 𝗖𝗿𝗲𝗃, has written a book on doing experimental intervention trials and how you can put qualitative data into them. It's a new book that just came out in the last year. It's very good. But she talks about these possibilities. So you see, I have a larger process here, an experiment. In the health sciences, we would call this an intervention trial. And we're embedding within that a mixed methods approach. Exploratory, convergent, explanatory. So this is my wife's dissertation in Japan, where she was looking at a behavioral program for adults that have autism. And she works with families in Kobe, Japan, in a special project. And she used the data from her project for her dissertation. It's called a Mixed Methods Intervention Design to Test a Behavioral Program Intervention. And really what she has here is a complex process where she's embedded these core designs in a couple of places. She first started with a needs assessment, qualitative needs assessment. And from that information developed a pilot trial, a pilot test trial, to see what the impact of this program was. So she had an exploratory sequential design building into this process. Then she followed up after that pilot trial with some qualitative data to be an understanding how the trial needed to be changed and improved. So here she has an explanatory sequential design between these two phases. And then, this was what, a 10-year project? She did finish, but it took a long time. After this, she then redesigned the intervention and had a control and experimental group, and actually had an experimental test building on what she had learned qualitatively here. So that was actually exploratory sequential design. So within this larger process of an experimental trial to look at the impact of this program, she had multiple core mixed method designs. And we presented this in a number of settings in Japan and other places in Southeast Asia. Now, another complex type of design in mixed methods is an evaluation project. You know, there are steps in how to do a good evaluation. They go back to really the 1980s. A number of writers identified what these steps are. For example, a needs assessment, coming up with a theory, developing some instrument measures, testing out the program, and then following up qualitatively. So we have qualitative and quantitative stages in this process. Well, we connect these two phases. We have an exploratory sequential design. And we have these two phases. We have an explanatory sequential core design. So we have two core designs within this larger process of how to do an evaluation. Now if you think about this for a minute, now what this does is it takes a standalone methodology with these core designs and applies them to many different situations. It can be applied to social network analysis. It could be applied to geocoding. It could be applied to participatory action research. So now what's happening is mixed methods is being taken out to all of these other larger processes. It can be applied to an experiment. So now mixed methods is going out further than just being a standalone methodology. And of course, as we start moving to these complex, the question became, well, what do we call this, John? What do we call this design? So, you know, we might say, this is a mixed methods intervention design with an exploratory sequential core component. Or mixed methods. Now, another application is doing case study research, where often case studies are built on both quantitative and qualitative data. A mixed methods comparative case study design with a core convergent component. Or a mixed methods evaluation design with both convergent and sequential core components. That's how I would write this up for publication, or write it up for an application for funding. We have that complex process here, and we have the core design here. Well, not only did we come up with what are some of the designs, but how do you begin visualizing these designs? And I know that as a qualitative researcher, I've always been very visually oriented. I know Mariko is too. She's been talking a lot about the concept map feature of MaxQDA and the mapping capability. Drawing a picture can really help reduce complex procedures to an understandable idea. Now this is an example of an explanatory sequential design figure. It's been used all over America by a lot of researchers as a model because it has three features here. The quantitative and qualitative flow of ideas here. The specific procedures at each step. And the products or outcomes that you expect to have at each step. If you think about this for a minute, first of all, it's a nice visual for a conference presentation. It'd be good to have on a poster. It's a way to summarize your entire project. If you're a graduate student, you could start with this diagram and say, here are my procedures all together that show the general steps on the left, the more specific method steps here, and then what I hope to gain here. So it's been a very useful. Some people would say that of all that we're doing in mixed methods research, these diagrams are perhaps the most useful. It's a tool, has many applications. A lot of times when people first start designing these diagrams, they become too complex. I like a very simple, straightforward picture of what I'm doing. So I try to simplify these. They do showcase the major procedures. Then the question became, well, how do you begin drawing these diagrams? I don't draw them in PowerPoint, which is too hard, but I don't draw them in Word. But I do draw them in PowerPoint, much easier. Or you could get a drawing program. So we began thinking about, well, how do you put one together? And I say, well, first, let's draw a quantitative box and a qualitative box. And we can put bullets for our data collection and data analysis procedures in those too. Then, if we're doing a convergent design, which is what this picture shows, we need to talk about interpreting or merging the data. And Plano Clark, my colleague, came along and said, well, we need a circle for this to distinguish it from the data. It's actually interpreting the data. And then, I believe it was Tim that came along several years ago and said, well, why don't we start arraying our research questions or our study aims on the different parts of our diagram. So in this project, aim 1 might be to explore the determinants of aging. Aim 2 would explore the personal experiences with aging. And then aim 3 to develop a more complete understanding of how people age. So putting the aims with the major components in the drawing. And then, well, we need a title for this. And I like combining the content with the design. So explain aging and convergent mixed method design. And then also we can put a timeline on this. And that's useful, especially if you're doing graduate student research. Those are just some of the features. There are a lot of others that have come forward, and we're basically improving and expanding our understanding of how to do a good mixed methods design. I'm going to show you one more, which would be the sequential type of design. How to draw an explanatory sequential design. I first start with the quantitative, then the qualitative, and then I'm going to put the words connecting in here, which is an integration word. I'm going to connect these two databases. and make an interpretation of how the qualitative explains the quantitative. Again, I can put the aims on each one of these boxes, and I can add a title, and I can add a timeline. Well, how do you draw one of these complex mixed methods designs? And several years ago, I was working on a large national project out in Oregon, in the state of Oregon. And they had an evaluation procedure. This is a community-based participatory action research study. And this is a study where you're involving the community and doing your research. And you first diagnose the needs of the community, you do some reconnaissance, you plan, you bring about some change, and then you evaluate the change and monitor that change. So what we have here is a CPR, a community-based participatory research process. Now, we can put mixed methods research into this and look at those places in those steps. What I say is first draw your steps of your process, and then look into the steps and see where you have the opportunity to collect both quantitative and qualitative data. And there you have an opportunity for a core design. Convergent, explanatory, exploratory. Here's another place in this process where they had an opportunity to collect both quantitative and qualitative data. And we have another opportunity for a core design. So if I'm working with somebody on a complex process, in fact with Mariko, this is the way we came up with our 4 stages. What were the stages in the process of your research? And then where were you collecting both quantitative and qualitative research? And then what was the core design within those? So we've become a little more sophisticated on how to draw these complex designs. Now here's another thing that came along that's extremely popular in the health sciences. Rather than having a diagram of your design, we began talking about having an implementation matrix. Now an implementation matrix is how you can visually present the different parts of your research project. In a research project, we have study aims, data collection, data analysis, outcomes, and in mixed methods we have an integration point as well. So why don't we put together a table or a matrix or even a figure that ties these parts together? You can see how this would be valuable. Somebody's reading your application for funding and they see a diagram of how all of the parts of your project fit together. It's an alternative to that diagram. It's a helpful way for a reviewer to easily see the major parts. It's really popular in the health sciences. So you remember I talked about that best practice guideline in 2011 that NIH group put together, had 20,000 hits in 2 weeks. This is a table from that report, which is implementation matrix. This is developed by Joe Gallo at Johns Hopkins. Here was his data collection strategy. Here was a sample. This was the goal of doing that sampling. And here was the analysis that occurred. So even back in 2011, we began to think about putting the different parts of the mixed methods project together in one table. Here's another example of implementation matrix. This is my daughter's. She's a Robert Wood Johnson Fellow, and she is studying the unidentified immigrants that come across the southern border in the United States. You've probably heard about that being an issue. And she was working with a team that was not that familiar with how to do research, but when she put this together, they could all get on board and talk about where they were in the project. There's a needs assessment phase, there's a survey development phase, there's development training, and then an impact assessment. Here are the participants, here's the intent for doing this, here are the data sources, here are the research questions that match this. The basic idea is that mixed methods is a complex procedure. Let's put together the different parts in a diagram. So a very simple model of what this might look like. This would be my preference. It lists the study aims, the data collection procedures, data analysis, the products or outcomes, and also the point where I'm either merging the data or connecting the data or embedding the data. Point of integration. And one of my colleagues at Michigan developed this for her project, where she filled in the parts. And she said she was going to integrate here, consisted of comparing the quantitative characteristics of patients with the interview themes. Another thing that we began thinking about more and more is if integration is a key feature of mixed methods research, let's think about how we can reinforce it throughout our project. Let's convey it several times. And I use an example that was actually designed by 𝗪𝗪 to convince her psychology professors of the value of her dissertation in Japan. But if you're baking bread, you're putting ingredients. I think this is raisins right here, so we're making raisin bread, right? So you can think about integration this way. We can integrate the raisins into the bread, but the raisins stay intact, don't they? When we can see the raisins, we can taste the raisins when we eat the bread. So quantitative and qualitative stay separate, but are connected. They're in the bread. They're connected. Now we can also take these other ingredients like flour and sugar. You notice the Japanese right here. That's butter, isn't it? In kanji characters. But we can integrate these different sugar, flour, etc. And what happens when we make bread is that the flour actually dissolves, doesn't it? It doesn't stay intact anymore. So in merging, these two databases are actually beginning to dissolve into each other. And we can take all the ingredients and put them in and embed them. So connection, embedding, merging are three ways we can really integrate. In writing mixed methods for the journal Mixed Methods Research, you need to talk about integration. You need to use that term. Because what we're doing is we're integrating the two databases. And even people that are experienced mixed methods researchers, like these scholars that are part of our NIH training program, when they write their projects initially, none of them are talking about the integration, but it's a key part. And it can be put in many places in a project. An integrative title, where you talk about integration in your title, or quantitative and qualitative. Justifying your study. Writing a mixed methods integrative question, which I'm going to get to in a little bit here. An integrative data table, an integrative implementation matrix, an integrative research design, integrative data analysis, integrative joint display. So there's a lot of ways you can put integration in. And just to be conscious of where integration occurs in these different types of designs. Like in convergent design, what we're going to do is we're going to integrate by comparing the quantitative and qualitative data. In explanatory sequential design, we're going to integrate by following up the quantitative results with qualitative data. So in our book, we talk about where actually integration occurs. And Jan Morris, nursing researcher out of Canada, she said, you need a red arrow, John, in her book to indicate where integration occurs. So why not put into your diagram the point where you're actually connecting the quantitative and qualitative data? In this explanatory sequential design, we're collecting quantitative data. We're using those results then to collect qualitative data, to identify who we're going to talk to, what questions we're going to ask. So we're integrating right here between these two phases. This makes explicit integration in our projects. And then some of these NIH trainees that we've been working with, they said, help us with some scripts and sentences for how we talk about integration. So we started putting together these scripts. Integration involves merging the results from the quantitative and qualitative data so that a comparison could be made and a more complete understanding emerge than what would be provided by the quantitative or qualitative results alone. And so we came up with these scripts on merging and connecting and building here. So we've been pushing this idea of integration. In fact, Dr. Fetters at Michigan has written quite extensively about integration in a new book that he's just published. Now, another thing that's important in doing mixed methods research is to think about your data and how you're going to present that in a project. If we're going to integrate the data, wouldn't you want to first determine what constitutes quantitative and qualitative data in your project? And for me, qualitative data consists of open-ended information and quantitative, closed-ended information that you're going to bring together. And just to be conscious of the types of data, as I said yesterday in the workshop, it just surprises me sometimes that people don't think in terms of what their quantitative and qualitative data might be. They're doing a project and I'm just gathering different types of data. But quantitative is more close-ended. Instrument data, observational checklists, documents with numeric numbers. And qualitative is more open-ended. Interviews, open-ended observations, open-ended documents, and of course all the social media possibilities. So to me, quantitative research has a small set of data collection possibilities. Qualitative has this huge set that continues to grow. And social media is promoting a lot. We can analyze text messages. We can analyze emails. We can analyze websites. Even things like sounds. My example of sounds would be, I went to a funeral of a very distinguished educator, and for the first 20 minutes of that funeral, they played sounds from a playground of children laughing and playing. And it brought home to me the importance, even sounds can be analyzed qualitatively. So every time I read about qualitative research, I have this list, compendium of qualitative data sources. It just keeps getting longer and longer. And I think that's one of the beauty of doing qualitative research is how rich and creative our data sources could be. In South Africa, using photo voice, where they give pictures to people and they have people talk about the pictures. It's a very rich source of information, very creative way. So why not have in your project a data table where you summarize the qualitative data sources, the quantitative data sources, who the participants are, how many of them, especially the N is very important in doing mixed methods research, because we need an N that's of sufficient size to meet the assumptions of statistics quantitatively, and qualitatively we need a much smaller N. One of the most controversial things for me in writing about qualitative research was this table in my qualitative inquiry book where I actually give suggestions on numbers for doing an ethnography, for doing a case study, for doing a phenomenology. And I pulled those not from just my own research, but looking at a lot of published studies. But all of them are small n's. Here's a filled out chart, data chart. I think in qualitative research, over the years we've done a good job of putting together a table that lists our different data sources. Because for me, one of the chief strengths of qualitative research is that we're gathering lots of data and different types of data. So I often put together in my qualitative articles a data table. But I'm not sure that I've seen a data table in quantitative exactly. They'll list variables, but maybe not the N and the participants, the sampling procedure. So in doing mixed methods research, it's important to do rigorous quantitative and qualitative. And just because you're collecting both forms of data doesn't mean that one needs to be less rigorous than the other. And for a long time, I've emphasized the rigor of doing good qualitative research. Multiple phases of data analysis, philosophical assumptions, using qualitative software. I'm of the rigorous qualitative school. So I've even developed a checklist of what I would find as a rigorous qualitative methods discussion about design, about the different data collection methods, about data analysis. And I actually use this. Often I'm called upon to review a proposal for funding, and I'm looking at the qualitative section of the mixed methods project, and I'm mentally going down through this list in my head of the possibilities. And then I also have a checklist for a rigorous quantitative methods discussion, what I would put into it. Identify the site, permissions, the recruitment, the number of participants, the sample size, using a sample size power calculation, the different types of data. These are some of the things. And this runs from descriptive to inferential types of statistics here. But you don't need to use my list. And I hope this can be, PowerPoint can be made available if you want to take a closer look at that list. But if you were to go to the APA manual, style manual, the new one that came out in October 2019, here we have an entire section on what a good, rigorous qualitative study might look like for publication. The standards. There's also a section on qualitative metasynthesis research. And there's a section on mixed methods research. And there's a section on rigorous quantitative research. So you can see the checklist there, right in the style manual now, to determine whether you have a good rigorous study. Our work was done and published in the American Psychologist, Standards for Qualitative and Mixed Methods Research. And so now this is an article form that you can find. You can read about the specific guidelines that we developed. We have tables. We have a table for what a good qualitative study would have in it and what a good mixed method study would have in it. And then that material was also then incorporated into the new style manual. So this is giving a boost to qualitative research, in my opinion, in the field of psychology, where qualitative has been kind of a distant cousin, perhaps, at times, because it's such a strong quantitative community. But now qualitative has foothold in the psychology field, as well as mixed methods research. A major historic step has occurred, I think. Well, creating a joint display, which is one of the features highlighted in MQIC. You know, joint display is really putting into a table your quantitative and qualitative results, but we've also added into this table the interpretation of looking across these results. So you might have, for example, quantitative scores arrayed against qualitative themes. And you can see if people that scored high, how they differed in terms of these themes. Or you could take one of your themes and see how they differed among the different scoring categories here. And these joint displays are being published in the mixed methods literature. And it's a very creative activity as to how you begin designing these. A study aim. If you're integrating, what question you're attempting to answer with your integration. So we've come up with a new type of aim or research question called a mixed methods aim or question. It's the question you're trying to answer with this integration of bringing the two databases together. And we have associated these aims with the different types of designs. So the aim in a convergent design is actually to compare the quantitative and qualitative results. The aim in an explanatory design is to describe how the qualitative can help explain the quantitative. And so now we are asking people, when they're doing mixed methods research, to have a quantitative aim, a qualitative aim, and a mixed methods aim. And that goes back to that 2011 best practices, which exactly recommends that procedure. Sample aims. For convergent design, to compare the qualitative interviews about elderly self-esteem with their perceptions on a survey about their self-esteem. Or to explain the results of the survey about self-esteem with the elderly with qualitative focus groups. So you can actually develop an aim that looks at the intersection, the integration of the two databases. And we've given some thought to how to order these aims and how to write up these aims. But the basic idea here that came forward was to start with the content and end with the data collection here. So to relate personal isolation to depression on older adults based upon survey data. So you can order your aims that fit the procedures of your design. This is the last one. Conceptual framework, or a theoretical framework. What explains what you hope to find? You know, we do have worldviews that then inform your conceptual or theoretical framework, that inform the methodology, that inform your methods of data collection. Putting a conceptual framework is important in research, usually one overarching framework. And the most important part of my list here would be to put it into your diagram. So here we have an explanatory sequential design, and we have a theory of behavioral change that helps explain the variables, the scales, the relationships we hope to find on our survey. So make your conceptual framework explicit in your diagram. And sometimes in mixed methods research, conceptual frameworks cover both the quantitative and qualitative components. So this is my colleague at Harvard who did a project looking at evaluating family strengths intervention in Rwanda, and she used this overarching conceptual framework for both her quantitative and qualitative components of the project. So these are some of the things.
Thank you so much. You took us on a very intense journey, John, and thank you
Good.
so much. And I think